What happens when a vehicle built decades ago suddenly becomes one of the most dangerous tools on the most modern battlefield in the world? Because in Ukraine, an old American Humvee did not fade into history. It came back as something far more deadly, far more useful, and far more surprising than almost anyone expected. If you love stories where smart tactics beat expensive assumptions, hit like, subscribe, and share this video with one person who still thinks old machines cannot change new wars. For years, the image of future war was simple. Invisible jets, hypersonic missiles, satellites feeding perfect data to armies that moved like machines. In that picture, an aging military truck had no starring role. It was background equipment, a support vehicle, a ride from one point to another. But Ukraine forced the world to look again. On muddy roads, broken tree lines, shelled villages, and drone-filled skies, the Humvee stopped being a transport story and became a survival story. That is what makes this so fascinating. The vehicle itself is not magical. It is not the strongest armored platform on the battlefield. It is not the newest. It is not the most expensive. And yet, in the hands of Ukrainian crews and mechanics, it has become the kind of machine that keeps showing up in the exact moments that decide whether soldiers live, whether supplies arrive, and whether an attack keeps moving or collapses in the dirt. That is the first thing to understand. Ukraine did not simply receive Humvees and drive them the way they were originally designed to be driven. Ukraine adapted them, it reworked them, it treated them less like finished products and more like starting points. That difference matters. In war, the platform is only half the story. The other half is imagination. A vehicle that can be repaired fast, modified fast, armed in different ways, and pushed into new roles becomes far more valuable than a perfect machine that is too rare, too delicate, or too expensive to risk. That is where the Humvee found its second life. A design born in the Cold War suddenly fit a battlefield shaped by drones, artillery, mud, mines, and constant change. What looked old on paper turned out to be flexible in practice. And flexibility is often what keeps an army alive when every fixed plan begins to fail. Ukraine also had a very real reason to lean into that flexibility. It needed numbers. It needed mobility. It needed vehicles that could do many jobs without demanding years of retraining or a heavy industrial miracle to keep them moving. Thousands of Humvees entered the Ukrainian war effort through American aid and support from partner countries. Exact totals vary across announcements and deliveries, but the broad picture is clear. Ukraine did not receive a handful for symbolic value. It built a real fleet. That matters because scale changes everything. One modified vehicle is a battlefield trick. Hundreds become a pattern. Thousands become doctrine. Once enough of them are present, you stop asking what this machine can do in a single dramatic moment and start asking how it changes the rhythm of an entire front. That is when the Humvee becomes dangerous, because war is not decided only by spectacular strikes. It is decided by who moves faster, recovers faster, adapts faster, and returns to the fight one more time than the enemy expected. And the battlefield Ukraine fights on is brutally unforgiving to anything slow and predictable. The famous mud seasons do not care how advanced a vehicle looks in a brochure. Heavy armor can become a prisoner of the ground itself. Tracks sink, wheels spin, fuel burns. Recovery becomes another problem. Every minute of delay creates a new target for artillery, drones, or loitering munitions. The Humvee changed that equation in many sectors because it could move where heavier systems struggled, and it could move fast enough that the enemy often reacted too late. That speed is not just about getting somewhere quickly, it is about refusing to stay still long enough to die. A Humvee can rush troops into position, drop ammunition, pull out the wounded, and leave before enemy fire fully settles in. On a battlefield where so much death comes from being located, and then hit within minutes, that kind of speed is not convenience. It is armor of a different kind. But mobility alone does not explain why the Humvee became so feared. The deeper story is modularity. Ukraine turned one basic platform into a family of battlefield tools. In one role, it moved infantry. In another, it worked as a medical evacuation vehicle. In another, it carried heavy weapons. In another, it became a reconnaissance platform or a quick-reaction gun truck. Some variants supported anti-armor teams. Others became mobile air defense assets. Others carried electronic warfare gear. And this is where the phrase old vehicle starts to break apart. If one chassis can keep changing jobs while the battlefield keeps changing threats, then it is no longer just a truck. It is a system. It is a framework for improvisation. That is exactly the kind of thing Ukraine needed. Something that could be rebuilt around the threat of the month, or the threat of the week, or even the threat of the morning. This matters because Russia's war has been shaped by layers of pressure rather than one single style of attack. Artillery, drones, mines, small assault groups, guided bombs, loitering munitions, surveillance from above, sudden pushes at weak points. To survive that environment, Ukraine needed tools that could shift from one job to another without slowing down the whole force. The Humvee fit that logic better than many people realized. It was not trying to replace every heavy vehicle. It was filling the gaps between them, and in some places, doing jobs that heavy armor could not do efficiently at all. That is why so many battlefield videos and reports show Humvees not as rear area support vehicles, but right there near danger, serving as connectors between intelligence, logistics, firepower, and escape. And then came the role that pushed the Humvee from useful to shocking: drone hunter. This is where the story becomes truly modern. Russia has relied heavily on drones for surveillance, target correction, harassment, and direct attack. Cheap systems can force expensive responses. A small flying camera can expose positions. A loitering drone can turn a trench, a truck, or an ammunition point into a smoking crater. FPV drones changed the emotional temperature of the war because they made danger feel personal and immediate. Soldiers could hear the buzzing, know what was coming, and still have only seconds to react. So what happens when an old truck becomes part of the answer to one of the newest battlefield threats? That is the unthinkable part. Not because it is science fiction, but because it is practical. And practicality is often more shocking than fantasy. Some Ukrainian Humvees have been paired with systems that give them anti-air and anti-drone teeth. The best-known example is the Avenger air defense system, mounted on a Humvee chassis. This weapon combines mobility with short-range air defense, allowing crews to move, hide, reposition, and suddenly engage airborne targets. That alone is valuable. But the real genius has been tactical economy. On a modern battlefield, cost matters almost as much as firepower. If you spend a highly valuable missile to kill every cheap drone, you may win a small engagement and lose the larger economic contest. Ukraine's adaptation showed a harder truth. Sometimes the smartest kill is the cheapest effective kill. If a machine gun can take down a low, slow drone in the right moment, then using the machine gun is not a downgrade. It is battlefield intelligence. And that continuing problem is exactly what Russian drone operators and assault planners had to face. A battlefield full of static targets is easier to study, easier to mark, and easier to hit. A battlefield full of moving threats is mentally exhausting. The enemy does not know whether the vehicle spotted near a tree line is carrying wounded soldiers, a heavy weapon team, a jammer, a reconnaissance crew, or an air defense element waiting for the right angle. Uncertainty spreads fear. Fear slows decisions. Slow decisions create windows. Ukraine used the Humvee to create those windows again and again. That is why this vehicle mattered beyond its physical shape. It introduced doubt into Russian timing. And once an army starts doubting its own timing, it begins losing invisible battles before visible ones even start. Now add electronic warfare to the picture, and the Humvee becomes even more dangerous. One of the most important lessons of this war is that the battle for the signal can be as important as the battle for the ground. Drones need links. Operators need pictures. Coordinated strikes need data. If you break the connection between the machine and the person controlling it, a drone can become blind, lost, or useless. Ukraine moved quickly to fit vehicles with jamming systems that could interfere with common drone frequencies and protect troops on the move. Mounted on Humvees, these systems created mobile electronic shields. That phrase matters: mobile electronic shields. Not static installations waiting to be found and hit, but moving bubbles of disruption traveling with the units that needed protection most. If you've made it this far, you're exactly the kind of viewer this channel is built for. So drop a like, subscribe, and send this video to someone who loves military history but has not yet seen how fast the future is rewriting it. The beauty of that approach is that it turns defense into motion. A static jammer can guard one place. A Humvee with electronic warfare gear can guard a route, a raid team, a supply run, a casualty evacuation convoy, or an advancing force. It can protect a unit for 1 hour and a different unit the next. That is incredibly valuable in a war where the front is long, threats are changing, and no commander has enough of every high-end system. The Humvee helped Ukraine spread protection across time and space. Not perfect protection, not magical protection, but often enough to break the enemy's attack chain and keep people alive. And again, that is the theme of this entire story. Not perfection, but useful adaptation under pressure. There is another reason this platform matters: repair culture. A weapon can be brilliant and still fail if it is too difficult to maintain near the front. One of the hidden strengths of the Humvee is that it belongs to a design family understood by many mechanics, supported by a broad spare parts ecosystem, and simple enough to keep returning to service. In a long war, repairability becomes combat power. An army does not fight with the number of vehicles it once received. It fights with the number it can still field today, tomorrow, and next month. Ukraine's workshops, field mechanics, and improvising crews turned that truth into an advantage. Every repaired Humvee is a quiet victory. Every modified Humvee is a lesson applied. Every recovered Humvee that returns to the line tells the enemy that damage is not the same as defeat. That is especially important when the battlefield itself is trying to kill mobility. Mines are one of the most brutal equalizers in war. They do not care about courage, speed, or experience. They wait. They turn roads, fields, and likely approaches into fear. They slow attacks, channel movement, and create easy opportunities for artillery or drone strikes. Russia has used dense minefields to shape the front and punish movement. So when we talk about Ukraine turning Humvees into something unthinkable, we also have to talk about how these vehicles entered the problem of mines. Some were fitted or adapted to work with mine-clearing tools, rollers, or engineering support missions. Others helped move quickly through corridors that had just been opened. That does not make the mine threat disappear, but it changes the psychology. A mined battlefield is less powerful when the defender realizes the attacker is learning how to cut lanes through it. Even more important, the Humvee allows engineering work to stay close to combat tempo. That sounds technical, but it is crucial. Clearing a path is one thing, exploiting it before the enemy reacts is another. A heavy breakthrough means little if the follow-on force cannot move fast enough to use the opening. Humvees helped bridge that gap. They could bring engineers, gear, security, ammunition, medics, and command elements into the same moving picture. In simple terms, they help turn cleared space into usable space. That is a huge difference. Many offensives fail not because the first obstacle is impossible, but because the force behind the first obstacle cannot move quickly enough once the chance finally appears. Then there is the night. Night hides movement, but in Ukraine it also invites risk. Assault groups use darkness to move closer. Drones hunt by different methods. Artillery waits for coordinates from thermal views and observation posts. The side that sees first usually acts first, and the side that acts first often controls the next minute of the fight. Humvees equipped with thermal optics, heavy machine guns, and mobile teams became part of Ukraine's answer here too. A fast-moving platform that can detect, reposition, and fire under cover of darkness has an outsized effect on enemy confidence. It tells assault units that darkness is no longer safety. It tells drone teams that the target may already be watching them. It tells commanders that routes assumed to be quiet may suddenly become killing zones. Notice what keeps happening in this story. The Humvee is not winning by being the best at one single thing. It is winning by being useful at many things at the exact moment usefulness matters most. This is a very different kind of military success than the glamorous kind people usually imagine. It is not the success of one perfect wonder weapon. It is the success of a platform that can carry different answers into different problems without forcing the army to rebuild its whole system every time the war changes shape. That is why the vehicle matters beyond Ukraine itself. Military planners around the world are watching and learning a hard lesson. Adaptability is not a backup plan. On a chaotic battlefield, adaptability may be the plan. And this is where the deeper conflict in the story becomes clear. Russia entered the war with its own expectations about shock, pressure, fear, and attrition. It expected that massed fire, drones, mines, and grinding pressure would trap Ukraine into a more static, more predictable struggle. In a static war, the side with more shells, more bodies, or more industrial scale often believes time is on its side. But Humvees helped Ukraine fight against static logic. They supported raids, fast repositioning, surprise resupply, casualty extraction, and sudden local counterattacks. They made the front less settled than it might have been. They helped preserve movement inside a war that constantly tries to kill movement. And that may be one of the most important strategic effects of all. Because once movement survives, choice survives. A commander with mobility can reinforce. He can probe. He can fake one action and do another. He can pull back before disaster or push forward before the enemy resets. Without mobility, every decision becomes slower and more obvious. With mobility, even a smaller force can generate confusion. Ukraine used that principle repeatedly. Humvees did not replace artillery, drones, or armor. They connected them. They carried people and equipment between moments that would otherwise remain isolated. They made different parts of the battlefield talk to each other in real time. And often, war is won by the side that connects separate advantages faster than the enemy can respond. That is also why these vehicles have had an effect on morale. Morale is not just speeches and flags. Morale is believing that if you are hit, someone can reach you. Believing that if your position is pressured, ammunition can still arrive. Believing that if a drone appears overhead, there is at least some answer nearby. Believing that if an opportunity opens, your side can move first. The Humvee became part of that belief. When troops see the same machine carrying wounded men out in the morning, bringing supplies in the afternoon, and supporting a strike by night, it stops being ordinary. It becomes part of the emotional architecture of resistance. Not a symbol in the abstract, but a practical symbol. And practical symbols are the ones soldiers remember most. At the same time, the Humvee's success reveals something uncomfortable about modern warfare. The battlefield punishes prestige. Expensive systems matter, of course they do. Long-range missiles matter. Advanced air defense matters. Precision weapons matter. But none of those erase the need for tools that are numerous, flexible, repairable, and ready to get dirty every single day. In fact, one of Ukraine's sharpest lessons is that glamorous technology and rugged utility must work together. The army that has only elite tools may find itself stretched thin. The army that combines elite tools with adaptable workhorses can absorb shocks, improvise faster, and keep functioning under punishment. That balance is where the Humvee became more than relevant. It became indispensable. So when people ask whether Ukraine turned old US Humvees into something unthinkable, the answer is yes, but not because it invented a fantasy machine. It did something more impressive. It turned a familiar vehicle into a moving solution for a battlefield full of new problems. It made old steel speak the language of drone war. It made a legacy platform part of electronic warfare. It made a transport chassis part of air defense, evacuation, reconnaissance, engineering support, and mobile defense. It transformed age into usefulness and usefulness into lethality. That is the kind of innovation that does not always look dramatic in a showroom, but on the front line it changes who gets the next chance to fight. Quick checkpoint. If this breakdown changed the way you see battlefield innovation, tap subscribe, leave a comment with the weapon system you want next, and share this video so more people can see how wars are really being adapted in real time. There is also a wider global message here. Armies around the world spent years preparing for high-end conflict in ways that sometimes separated old platforms from new doctrine. Ukraine's experience is forcing a rethink. A vehicle does not become obsolete simply because it is old. It becomes obsolete when it cannot be adapted. The Humvee can be adapted. That single fact has enormous value. It means stockpiles once seen as yesterday's equipment may still hold tomorrow's solutions if the user is creative enough. It means defense planning cannot just ask, what is the newest system? It also has to ask what can survive, what can scale, what can be repaired, and what can be transformed quickly when the battlefield changes. Those are not glamorous questions, but they are the questions that separate procurement from survival. And maybe that is the biggest emotional twist in this entire story. The Humvee was never supposed to be the star of a future war narrative. It was supposed to be familiar, standard, almost invisible. Yet war has a brutal way of promoting the overlooked. Under enough pressure, the machine that endures is not always the one with the best brochure. It is often the one that can still move, still carry, still shield, still adapt, and still return after the shockwave passes. Ukraine understood that. It did not worship the Humvee. It used it. It pushed it. It changed it. It made it answer a battlefield that was changing faster than anyone expected. And in doing so, it reminded the world of something powerful. Military innovation is not only about invention, it is about reinterpretation. That is why Russian planners had such a problem with these vehicles. Not because a Humvee is invincible. It is not. It can be hit, destroyed, burned, and disabled like anything else in war. But invincibility is the wrong measure. The right measure is whether a system creates more problems than the enemy expected for the cost of fielding it. By that measure, the Humvee has been a serious success. It complicates drone operations. It supports dispersed defense. It helps units move through dangerous terrain. It enables quick concentration and fast withdrawal. It carries anti-air, anti-armor, medical, engineering, and reconnaissance functions on a common base. It keeps showing up in roles that force the enemy to spend attention, ammunition, and planning time. On a long front, that kind of pressure accumulates. And accumulation is how many wars are really decided. Not by one giant cinematic moment, but by thousands of smaller moments that slowly tilt the balance. A convoy arrives. A squad survives extraction. A drone loses signal. A night assault is broken. A mine lane is exploited in time. A wounded soldier reaches care. A strike team gets into position before dawn. An enemy crew hesitates because the battlefield feels less certain than it did yesterday. The Humvee sits inside that chain of moments. Not all of them, not by itself, but enough of them to matter. Enough of them to become part of the story of how Ukraine kept adapting when the cost of not adapting was death. So in the end, the unthinkable thing was not that an old American vehicle appeared in a modern European war. The unthinkable thing was that Ukraine found a way to turn that vehicle into a battlefield language all its own, fast when it needed speed, armed when it needed force, shielded when it needed protection, silent when it needed to hide, loud when it needed to hunt, useful almost everywhere because it refused to stay trapped in one identity. That is what makes this story bigger than a vehicle. It is a story about adaptation beating assumption. It is a story about how imagination can stretch the life of old machines and make them terrifyingly relevant again. And maybe that is the lesson every military on Earth is studying now. The future of war will not belong only to the side with the newest hardware. It will belong to the side that can combine technology, scale, speed, repair, and improvisation faster than the enemy can adjust. Ukraine showed that with drones. It showed that with electronic warfare. And with the Humvee, it showed that even a veteran machine can become a predator when the people using it understand the battlefield better than the people attacking it. So the next time someone tells you modern war is only about the newest missile, the stealthiest jet, or the biggest tank, remember the muddy roads of Ukraine and the old American Humvee that refused to stay old. Because sometimes history does not return as nostalgia. Sometimes it returns with a stronger engine, a new mission, and a battlefield full of enemies who never saw it coming. If this video gave you a new lens on modern warfare, lock in your support with a like, subscribe for the next deep dive, and share this with the friend who always says old gear belongs in museums. After this story, we know better. In this war, Ukraine did not just inherit a machine, it reinvented one. And in doing that, it may have revealed one of the most important truths of modern combat. The deadliest weapon is often not the newest one. It is the one your enemy misunderstood until it was too late.